They laughed at me like I didn't belong, like I was just some nobody crashing their perfect little world. But what they didn't realize is that I didn't come there to beg. I came holding the kind of truth that flips every table in the room. Let them mock me. Just wait until you see who walked in behind me, and why the entire night changed with a single word: wife. I was born into a world where everything appeared perfect from the outside. My name is Harper Matthews, and for the first 8 years of my life, I thought I had it all. 2 loving parents, a beautiful home, and a sense of safety I didn't know could disappear so fast. My father, Thomas, was a self-made success in Boston's financial world, and my mother, Rachel, brought warmth to every room she entered. She made childhood magical, grounding me with love in a life of abundance. I didn't know how fragile that magic was until it was gone. When Mom got sick, everything began to unravel. Cancer came quickly and without mercy, and within half a year she was gone. Dad was shattered. He didn't know how to be a father without her. He buried himself in work, and I was left alone in a house full of silence, save for the revolving door of well-meaning nannies. None of them could fill the hole she left in my chest. I remember birthdays that felt like formal obligations, and holidays that grew quieter each year. Dad would nod and smile, but his eyes were always somewhere else. I tried to be the strong one, the good daughter, the girl who didn't make waves. But grief has a way of reshaping everything, even a child's sense of belonging. I began to learn that love could vanish just as quickly as it was given. Then came Elaine. She entered our lives like a breeze of sophistication, all charm and charity gala smiles. I was 10 and desperate for something maternal, so I believed in her. I believed in the promise of a new beginning, a family remade with softer edges. But what I didn't know was that Elaine wasn't coming to complete us. She was coming to replace everything. At first, she pretended to embrace me. She said all the right things, bought matching bracelets for me and her daughter, Madison, but her words were sugar-coated bait, meant to distract from what she was really doing, reclaiming the Matthews household for herself and her child. And slowly, quietly, I began to vanish from my own home. The erasure didn't come all at once. It was small things at first. Madison getting the larger bedroom. Even though I'd lived there first, her name appeared first on everything. Holiday cards, guest seating charts, even our family voicemail message. Elaine would say, "It's just easier this way," like my presence was a scheduling conflict to be rearranged. When Christmas came, Madison had her gifts arranged in beautiful stacks, coordinated by color. Mine were smaller, simpler, practical things. And every time I asked for something, Elaine would nod politely and say, "We'll see." That "we'll see" became the quiet anthem of my adolescence. A gentle, strategic denial cloaked in civility. By middle school, I was using the guest bathroom full-time, because Madison needed her privacy. She got riding lessons, new boots, designer backpacks. I got permission to check out library books. It was as if every request I made was weighed against hers and always found lacking. And still, I kept quiet, because I thought silence would keep the peace. My father didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't want to admit it. Elaine was careful with him, timing her tears and praise with surgical precision. "I'm trying so hard with Harper," she'd say, just loud enough for me to hear. And Dad, so emotionally tired, would pat her hand and mumble something about how grateful he was for her patience. That's how it always was. Elaine orchestrated the narrative. Madison played the favored daughter, and I played the ghost. Not dramatic enough to be cast out completely, but just inconvenient enough to be brushed aside. It was a slow, suffocating lesson in how a person can disappear while still living in their childhood home. The real heartbreak wasn't even Elaine. It was watching my dad fade out of my life while physically sitting in the same room. He used to be the one who tucked me in at night, who asked about my school day with genuine interest. But as the years passed, his questions became automated, and his affection, procedural, like he was checking off a box. He didn't mean to vanish. I believe that. He was tired, overwhelmed, and caught in Elaine's web. But intention doesn't soften the impact of neglect. I started to resent him, not because he loved her, but because he stopped protecting me from the ways she made me feel so small. And somehow, I was always the problem in her stories. Every missed school event became a "Harper didn't tell us." Every broken promise was my overreaction. When I spoke up, I was labeled difficult. When I stayed silent, I was ignored. I learned early that my best defense was invisibility. So I buried myself in books, in sketch pads, in a world where my voice mattered, even if no one else heard it. Art became my escape, my silent rebellion. Every painting, every sketch was a place I could exist without judgment. I saved money from part-time jobs to buy supplies that Elaine always said we couldn't afford because Madison needed new horseback gear. But in those colors, I found something precious, myself. There were rare moments when Dad saw me again. He came to one of my art exhibitions in high school. He cried when he saw my work and whispered, "You have your mother's hands." For one night, I was his daughter again. Not Elaine's problem. And that small flicker of recognition lit a hope in me I didn't even know I still had. After that art exhibition, I waited for something to change. For my father to remember that I was still here, still his daughter. But the moment passed like smoke through fingers. He congratulated me, kissed my forehead, and went back to his world, where Elaine ruled and I remained peripheral. Holidays became something I dreaded. I was technically present, but emotionally exiled. Elaine made it clear. Traditions were hers to define now. She hosted elaborate dinners, planned photo-perfect events, and always found subtle ways to exclude me. My place at the table was near the edge. My name misspelled on place cards, my voice drowned by stories of Madison's academic success and European adventures. I started eating less, speaking less, existing less. Madison basked in it all, her charm weaponized, her every accomplishment exaggerated like she was the family's crown jewel. She had a talent for making me feel ridiculous without saying a word. A raised eyebrow, a whisper to a cousin, a shared smirk with Elaine across the table. Those were her games, and I kept losing. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to flip the perfectly arranged dinner table and ask my father why he couldn't see the cruelty unfolding in his own house. But I never did. I swallowed my pain with mashed potatoes and forced laughter, praying for the night to end. Being there was unbearable. Not being there was even worse. Each year, I lost a little more of myself at those dinners. I learned how to fold grief into napkins, how to smile through betrayal, how to become invisible in a room full of relatives. And somewhere along the line, I stopped hoping they'd notice. I stopped expecting love from people who only saw me as a reminder of a woman they'd replaced. The summer after my freshman year in college, everything shattered for good. My phone rang in the middle of a part-time gallery shift, and I answered to a stranger's voice telling me my father had collapsed. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. Just like my mother, he disappeared without warning, leaving me again. The funeral was a performance. Elaine wore black lace and crocodile tears, and Madison gave a eulogy that painted our father as a perfect patriarch who adored his family, meaning them, not me. I sat in the second row, too numb to cry, listening to the story of a man I barely recognized. My grief was buried under layers of exclusion. It wasn't until the reading of the will that I understood how complete my erasure had become. Elaine inherited the estate. Madison got trust funds, properties, assets. I received exactly enough to finish college and survive for maybe a year. That was it. A footnote in my father's legacy. He wanted you to learn the value of hard work, Elaine said. Her voice was sweet, her eyes cold. And just like that, my last lifeline to that house, to that family, was cut. I left the lawyer's office with a check, a shaking hand, and a broken heart. I wasn't just alone. I was discarded. The message was clear. I didn't belong. I never really had. That night, I sat in my tiny dorm room and let the tears come for the first time. I cried for my father, for my mother, for the little girl who used to believe family was forever. But somewhere in that ocean of sorrow, a new voice emerged. A whisper that said, "This isn't the end. This is where you start again." Elaine wasted no time making it official. A week after the will was settled, she called me to the house. Not for closure, not for comfort. Just to make it clear I had to leave. "You're an adult now, Harper. It's time you found your own place," she said, as if I hadn't just buried my last parent. I packed in silence. Madison watched from the doorway as I folded up childhood memories and stuffed them into boxes. She didn't offer help, or even pretend to be sad. "Don't worry about the holidays," she said casually. "Our traditions are changing." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I was no longer a Matthews in that house, just a name on a mailbox they'd replace. I moved into a small apartment near campus, paid for with the remnants of my inheritance. Every dish, every piece of furniture, I chose myself. It was the first space that was entirely mine. No Elaine, no Madison, no shadows of my father's indifference. It was humble, but it was sacred. A place where I could finally breathe. I took on 2 jobs to make it work: the campus library and a small art gallery on the weekends. I had no time for parties or distractions. My life was work, study, sleep, and healing, bit by bit. I kept my head down and my heart guarded. I'd learned that hope, when placed in the wrong hands, could destroy you. But with every painting I hung in the gallery, every night I closed my eyes in peace, something inside me began to shift. Not in grand ways, just small, quiet moments of reclaiming my own worth. I wasn't anyone's burden anymore. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I was becoming someone I could be proud of, without permission from anyone. Cambridge wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My apartment was the size of a generous closet, with creaky floors and a leaky faucet, but I loved every square inch of it. For the first time, I wasn't living under scrutiny or comparison. My past was behind me, boxed up, both literally and emotionally. I poured my energy into what I could control. My days were full but purposeful. I balanced gallery shifts with late-night study sessions, slowly earning respect from professors and artists alike. The art world felt like home, a place where broken things were transformed into beauty. I started sketching again, not for anyone else, but to reconnect with something I thought I'd lost. Creating brought me back to life. The gallery wasn't prestigious, but it had soul. We championed undiscovered artists and gave them space to grow. I wasn't just selling paintings. I was helping people believe in their voices, even when the world ignored them. Maybe that's why I felt so drawn to it. I knew what it meant to be overlooked, and I was done living in the margins. I lived frugally: DIY furniture, thrift store finds, and home-cooked pasta 4 nights a week. But I never felt poor. My freedom was priceless. I didn't owe anyone explanations, didn't need approval for how I dressed, where I went, or what I valued. That in itself was a kind of quiet wealth. I was building something no one could take away. Most nights, I fell asleep to the hum of the city outside my window, a sketchbook beside me and my phone blissfully silent. No more waiting for a family call that would never come. No more wondering if they missed me. They didn't, and I had stopped needing them to. I wasn't healed yet, but I was growing. It was a gray, drizzly Tuesday when Nathan Reed walked into the gallery. I remember it clearly because I was in the middle of unpacking sculptures and had nearly dropped one when the bell chimed. He looked unassuming in jeans and a button-down, damp from the rain, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence. No entourage, no arrogance. I greeted him with my usual mix of professionalism and curiosity. Most of our visitors were either students or established collectors looking to be impressed. Nathan was neither. He was just present, interested. He stood in front of a Lucia Mendes painting, arms folded, studying it like it held answers. "Can I help you?" I asked. And so it began. We talked art for almost an hour. Not in that hollow, name-dropping way some patrons did, but deeply. He asked about the use of negative space, about how urban loneliness could be visualized through brushstrokes. I told him everything I knew, and when I ran out of words, he filled the silence with thoughtful insight. I didn't know who he was yet. I didn't care. At the end of his visit, he handed me a card. I only glanced at it after he left. Nathan Reed, CEO, Reed Innovations. My breath caught. I knew the name. Everyone in Boston's business and tech circles did, but there'd been no trace of ego in him. Just genuine curiosity. He wanted to talk more. Over coffee. I hesitated, then said yes. That coffee turned into dinner. And that dinner turned into something I hadn't let myself imagine in years. Hope. Nathan wasn't dazzled by my past or disappointed by it. He wasn't looking for a social match or a trophy wife. He just liked me. And for someone who'd spent so long being tolerated rather than cherished, that felt revolutionary. 3 months into our relationship, Nathan brought up the subject I always dodged. We were on his rooftop, wine glasses in hand. The city spread beneath us like a sea of flickering stars. "You never talk about your family," he said gently. "Why?" I hesitated. For once, it wasn't because I was ashamed. I just didn't know where to begin. So I told him everything. My mother's death, my father's distance, Elaine's strategic cruelty, Madison's smug superiority, the inheritance, the exile, the erasure. I told him how it felt to sit at your father's funeral and realize you were only there because it would have looked bad if you weren't. How it felt to pack your life in silence. Nathan didn't interrupt. He didn't offer cliches or tell me to get over it. He held my hand and listened, fully, attentively. And when I was finished, he said something I didn't know I needed. "They failed you, not the other way around." That one sentence unraveled years of shame. It was like someone finally cut the invisible leash I'd worn. From that night on, something shifted between us. I stopped flinching when he asked about my past. I stopped apologizing for the scars I carried. With Nathan, I didn't have to curate my story. I could just be. I could be angry and soft, vulnerable and ambitious. For the first time, I saw what love looked like when it wasn't conditional. He met me where I was, guarded, complicated, healing, and stayed. That's when I knew this was different. Not a rescue, not a fantasy. Just two people choosing each other, daily, despite everything. And for a woman who had once been told, repeatedly, that she didn't belong, that was the kind of miracle I never expected to find. Our love story didn't unfold in grand gestures. It grew slowly, like ivy climbing a wall, steady and sure. Nathan never tried to fix me. He simply made space for me to breathe. In that space, I began to heal. Not because he rescued me, but because he saw me clearly and chose to stay. We built a rhythm that was quiet but powerful. Sunday morning coffees, gallery openings, long walks where we shared dreams without expectation. There were no illusions between us. I never pretended to be someone I wasn't, and he never asked me to be. His acceptance was a balm I didn't know I needed. Eventually, I met his family. They were everything mine wasn't. Messy, honest, loud, and unapologetically loving. His mother cried when she hugged me for the first time. "We've heard so much about you," she whispered. His father gave me a goofy mug that said, "Best daughter-in-law already." It cracked something open in me. That dinner was when I realized I had been starving. Not for food or status, but for belonging. I hadn't known how much I craved that until it was offered without condition. These weren't people trying to control me or reshape me. They simply welcomed me as I was. No performance, no pedestal. Later that night, Nathan held me while I cried. "You deserve all of this," he said softly. And for the first time, I believed him. Not just because he said it, but because I felt it. I was no longer trying to prove my worth. I was simply living it. And in that simple truth, I finally started feeling whole. When Nathan proposed, there was no flash mob, no fireworks. Just us, barefoot on a quiet beach in Provincetown, watching the tide roll in. He took my hands, looked me in the eyes, and asked if I'd keep building a life with him. "You've changed how I see the world, Harper," he said. "Will you keep walking with me?" I said yes without hesitation. Not because I needed someone to save me, but because I wanted to keep choosing him. We married 2 months later in his parents' backyard. Just 30 guests, string lights, and the kind of laughter that echoed long after the music stopped. No one from my side attended. And that was okay. Our wedding wasn't about showmanship. It was about peace, about building something quiet, strong, and ours. I wore a simple gown, walked barefoot across the grass, and said vows that felt like promises to both of us, and to the woman I was still becoming. Nathan looked at me like I was everything, not in spite of my past, but because of it. Afterward, we honeymooned in Japan, exploring temples and markets, marveling at beauty in unexpected corners. We came home with stories, photographs, and a deeper bond. We moved into a brownstone in Brooklyn and returned to work with renewed focus. Our life wasn't flashy, but it was rich with intention. For 2 years, we stayed out of the spotlight. I kept my maiden name professionally. Nathan respected my desire to build without being defined by his success. And in that quiet space, I became stronger. I wasn't hiding. I was honoring the parts of myself that still needed time to bloom without outside noise. The cream-colored envelope arrived without warning. Thick cardstock, gold embossing, and handwriting I hadn't seen in 6 years. Elaine Matthews cordially invites you. My stomach dropped before I finished reading. The Gala, her annual performance of philanthropy and self-importance. And now, for some reason, I was invited. I stared at the note for hours. There was a handwritten message paperclipped to it. It's been too long. The family misses you. The irony burned. They hadn't missed me when I graduated alone, when I cried in empty rooms, or when they erased me from their holiday tables. Why now? When Nathan got home and saw the envelope, he froze. The Matthews Gala, he asked, eyebrows raised. You were invited? I nodded, pushing the note toward him. That's when he revealed the twist neither of us saw coming. His foundation was anonymously funding the entire event. My estranged stepmother was about to host a gala paid for by my husband. The coincidence felt almost cinematic. She doesn't know? I asked. Not unless she did her research, he said. We kept the donation anonymous. I laughed. Bitter, bewildered, and a little amazed. The universe had an odd sense of humor. This woman, who tried to erase me, was building her reputation on funds I now shared. At first, I wanted nothing to do with it. Let them play their games. Let them toast their false generosity. But Nathan saw something I didn't. Maybe this is your moment, he said. Not for revenge, for resolution. I considered it long into the night. Maybe it was time. Not to be seen, but to see myself walk in without shame. Choosing what to wear wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about reclaiming the version of myself that had been ignored. I found the perfect gown through a designer the gallery supported. Midnight blue, elegantly structured, with subtle embroidery that shimmered like stardust under light. It wasn't loud. It was powerful, a visual echo of everything I had become. The dress was more than fabric. It was a message. I would not shrink. I would not apologize for being present. I wasn't there to compete with Madison or outshine Elaine. I was there because I had been invited. And more importantly, because I had chosen to show up. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for that. In the dressing room, I stared at my reflection for a long moment. I didn't see the discarded stepdaughter. I didn't see the girl who packed her own boxes while her family watched from the hallway. I saw a woman who had survived, who had loved, lost, rebuilt, and now stood unshaken. That woman deserved to take up space. Nathan kissed my forehead before I left. No matter what happens, he said. Remember who you are. You're walking in there on your terms. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I wasn't attending their gala to win them over. I was there to remind myself that I no longer needed anything from them. Not money, not love, not permission. The car dropped me off in front of the Rosewood Hotel. Flashbulbs sparked in the distance. The red carpet shimmered. I stepped out, chin high, dress flowing behind me like a cape. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was crashing their world. I felt like I had stepped into my own. Inside, the ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers and meticulously arranged floral centerpieces. Familiar faces drifted past me, some shocked, others pretending not to notice. Patricia, my father's cousin, blinked twice before approaching. "Harper?" she said, as though I were a ghost. "Is that really you?" I smiled calmly. "It's Harper Reed now." They all asked the same question in different tones. "What have you been up to?" Their curiosity was laced with judgment. When I told them about my position at the gallery, their eyes flickered, impressed but unwilling to admit it. It didn't matter. I wasn't there for approval. I was there to witness what I no longer needed. Then I saw Elaine, standing at the center of the room, perfectly composed, surrounded by old money and new alliances. Madison was beside her, all designer silk and carefully curated charm. They noticed me. The moment passed between us like static before a storm. Madison leaned in to whisper something. Elaine's smile tightened. I approached them, heart steady. "Harper," Elaine said, her voice syrupy sweet, just loud enough for others to hear. "What a surprise." "You invited me," I replied coolly. "It's your signature, after all." Madison scanned me from head to toe. "Interesting dress? Off the rack?" "Custom," I answered. "From a rising talent." Like me. Their faces froze for a second. Then Elaine pivoted toward the nearby board member, brushing me off with polished elegance. Harper's always had creative ambitions, she said with practiced condescension. But she's not seriously in the arts. I could have stayed silent, but I didn't. Actually, I said, I'm assistant director at Westfield Gallery. We specialize in impact-driven art. Her smile faltered. Elaine's microphone announcement came unexpectedly. We'd like to thank our catering and event staff. Polite applause followed. Then, without warning, her eyes locked onto mine. In fact, I believe one of our waitstaff may have forgotten her uniform. The room went quiet. I felt my stomach sink. Was this really happening? The laughter was scattered at first. Nervous. Confused. Then Madison stepped forward. Maybe Harper just wanted to see how the other half lives, she said sweetly, phone in hand. More laughter followed. This was planned. Orchestrated. Their invitation had been bait. A trap designed to embarrass me in front of Boston's elite. I stood frozen, champagne flute in hand, while Elaine gestured to security. Could you please escort her out? She's confused about her place tonight. Michael, the guard, looked hesitant as he approached me. Ma'am, he said softly. I reached for my clutch, trembling fingers finding the invitation. I was invited, I said firmly. Elaine's voice turned syrupy again. It was just a courtesy copy, dear. Extended family aren't always expected to attend. Madison giggled behind her phone. Is your husband coming to pick you up? She asked, smirking. Or is he as imaginary as your social standing? My cheeks burned. My throat tightened. But I didn't cry. They thought they had won. That once again I'd be shamed into silence, escorted away like a child who dared sit at the grown-up table. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man they were mocking me in front of was minutes away, and with him, everything was about to change. Madison leaned in close, voice dripping with contempt. You should leave before it gets even more embarrassing. She was savoring it. This moment of public power over me. I looked around the room again, hoping, just once, that someone would speak up. But all I saw were averted gazes and whispered gossip. No one stood with me. Even Uncle William, my father's brother, who used to toss me in the air when I was little, said nothing. He simply chuckled, sipping his wine like it was entertainment. Aunt Susan, her pearls gleaming, gave me a polite, pitying glance and turned away. My presence wasn't just unwelcome. It was offensive to their curated narrative. Elaine's voice cut through again. Security, please. Let's not disrupt the flow of the evening. Her cruelty was masked in politeness, the way only practiced manipulators can do. Michael, still visibly uncomfortable, gently took my elbow again. Please. Ma'am, this isn't personal. But it was personal. It had always been personal. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about every dismissed achievement, every birthday they skipped, every time I was told I didn't matter. My entire life with them had led to this moment, being treated like an intruder at a party my own family was hosting. I'm not making a scene, I whispered. They are. I pulled my arm from Michael's grasp and held up the invitation. This says I was invited. You don't get to rewrite that just because I don't fit your image of success. More eyes turned toward me. Some surprised, some amused, but a few were finally listening. I straightened my back. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. I checked my watch again. Nathan was close. 15 minutes, maybe less. I just had to hold on a little longer. Elaine was still performing, now turning to Madison. Call the press table, she said sweetly. Let's ensure the media doesn't focus on unfortunate distractions. Translation: erase me from every record of this night. Madison turned to the photographer with a saccharine smile. Be sure to crop her out of any crowd shots. She wasn't really part of the guest list. My cousin Brandon chimed in from the side. She's always had this delusion of grandeur. Thinks she's better than she is. I clenched my fists. It wasn't just ridicule. It was rewriting history. I opened my clutch again, pulling out my phone. I thought of texting Nathan, telling him not to come inside. But something inside me stopped. No. He needed to see this. He needed to see what I had endured in silence for years. This wasn't just a moment of cruelty. It was a mirror of a lifetime. Then the doors opened. And everything, every whisper, every chuckle, every cruel smirk, fell silent, because there he was, Nathan Reed, impeccable in his tailored tuxedo, radiating the kind of power that couldn't be faked. He stepped inside like he owned the room, because, in many ways, he did. His eyes scanned the room, finding me instantly, and in that second, I saw the confusion on everyone's faces turn into shock. The most powerful man in the room was walking toward the girl they had just tried to throw out, and every smug expression around me began to melt into panic. The tide had turned. "Nathan," I said, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer at first. He just reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. Then, in a voice that carried across the stunned room, he asked, "Why is my wife being escorted out of a gala we helped fund?" The effect was immediate. You could hear the silence crack. Elaine froze mid-step. Madison's phone dropped an inch. Uncle William's drink paused in midair. Every guest turned. My wife. Those two words were sharper than any insult Elaine had ever thrown at me. I had never seen her so visibly shaken. And suddenly, I wasn't the forgotten stepdaughter. I was someone they had all underestimated. Elaine's instinct kicked in. "Mr. Reed, this is such an honor. Please, there's been a misunderstanding." But Nathan didn't even look at her. He looked only at me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft now. I nodded, swallowing a wave of emotion. "You got here just in time." His expression hardened again as he turned. He addressed the crowd, his voice strong. "For those unaware, my foundation is the anonymous benefactor behind tonight's event." Gasps filled the air. Elaine's mask cracked. Madison looked like she might faint. "And this woman," he pulled me gently to his side, "is not here to serve drinks. She's my wife, and she belongs here." The balance of power shifted in an instant. No longer the mocked outsider, I was now the one standing beside Boston's most influential man. The same people who had laughed were now scrambling to appear supportive. But it was too late. The moment had already exposed them, and there was no going back. Elaine tried to regain control, but the room wasn't hers anymore. Not after Nathan had spoken. "Of course, we're thrilled to welcome such a generous supporter," she said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. But the crowd had heard enough to question her version of events. The whispers spread faster than her charm could smother. Madison, still holding her phone, tried to switch tactics. "Harper, you should have told us. We would have welcomed you properly." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. 10 minutes ago, she was gleefully filming my humiliation. Now she wanted to act like we were best friends. "You didn't care who I was until he walked in." Nathan remained silent beside me, letting their hypocrisy play out. His presence was a shield, one I didn't know I needed until now. For years I'd fought to prove my worth alone, and suddenly, just by standing next to me, Nathan forced the room to reevaluate everything they thought they knew, especially about me. Elaine, growing desperate, gestured to the photographer. "Let's take a photo, a reunion shot for the Foundation archives." She reached out like she expected me to pose beside her. "You'll want this moment, Harper." Her voice was syrupy, sickening. I met her gaze directly, calm now. "No thanks. I've got better memories to frame." There was a subtle shift in the room. People watching saw it, even if they didn't admit it aloud. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a reckoning. One where power was no longer on their side. For the first time, they were the ones scrambling to prove they belonged. And I had nothing left to prove. Uncle William stepped forward, eager to pivot. "Harper, sweetheart, we've always wished you well. You were just private." The lie stung more than the silence. "No," I said calmly. "You watched me disappear and said nothing. You let them erase me and clapped while it happened." He had no reply, just awkward silence. Madison spoke up again, trying to salvage what she could. "Maybe we didn't handle things well, but you didn't exactly make it easy. You shut us out." I laughed. Not from amusement, but disbelief. "I didn't shut you out. I was pushed out. There's a difference." She opened her mouth again, but Nathan stepped in. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice ice. "There's no apology in this room. Only panic." Madison looked down. Elaine tried again. "Surely we can move forward as a family. Let's not air grievances here." But it was already too late. The grievances had aired themselves, loud and clear, for the whole city to witness. Someone nearby muttered, "It's about time someone called them out." That person didn't realize I heard them, but their words bolstered me. I wasn't alone anymore. The shame I'd carried for years, that perhaps I'd deserved the way they treated me, was dissolving in the light of truth, and it felt freeing. Elaine's voice cut through again, thinner now. "We've all made mistakes. Let's remember this is a charity event." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was asking for grace after publicly denying mine, but I wasn't going to give her what she refused to offer me for a decade: silence and compliance. I turned to face her fully, this woman who had replaced my mother and tried to erase me. "You didn't invite me to reconnect," I said quietly but firmly. "You invited me to humiliate me, and now you're scrambling to clean it up because I didn't crumble the way you expected." Her face paled. The truth, undeniable. Nathan's hand was still on mine, solid and steady. "I would have loved for this to be a reconciliation," I added, letting the hurt show just enough. "But reconciliation requires sincerity. And there's nothing sincere about pretending kindness for the sake of your reputation." That line hit harder than I expected. Elaine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, she seemed speechless. The woman who always had a clever retort, a cutting remark, was left blinking in silence. It was the most honest moment we'd ever shared. Madison stepped closer, whispering, "Mom, let's go." But Elaine stayed frozen. Across the room, board members were murmuring. I caught eyes with one, a woman I didn't know but whose expression held something close to admiration. People weren't just witnessing a scandal anymore. They were witnessing a shift. I had been the outsider, the forgotten girl, but now I was the one holding the mirror, and they didn't like what they saw in their reflection. I took a deep breath and said the words that would end it all. "I don't need your approval." I never did, but I needed to face this so I could let it go. Then, gently, I turned to Nathan. "Let's sit. Dinner's about to be served." And just like that, we walked away. As we returned to our table, a hush followed us like a shadow. No longer the source of mockery, I had become the center of a new narrative. People turned as we passed, but now their expressions weren't smug. They were contemplative, curious, even impressed. Power had shifted in the room, and they all felt it. Nathan pulled out my chair before sitting beside me, his presence quiet but commanding. I glanced around and saw Madison whispering furiously to Elaine, both their faces tight with panic. They weren't used to losing control, especially not in public. This was their territory, and I'd just rewritten the script. Dinner was served, and conversations resumed, but they were different now, softer, cautious. The guests who had once ignored me now approached with champagne smiles and careful compliments. "Such poise," one woman remarked. "You handled that beautifully." I thanked her, but her words barely registered. I wasn't performing for praise. My hands still trembled slightly under the table, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline. For the first time in years, I'd spoken up for myself in a room full of people who once deemed me invisible. I wasn't a ghost haunting their memories. I was real, undeniable, and standing in full light. Nathan leaned close, his breath warm near my ear. "That was incredible, Harper." I turned to him, tears stinging behind my eyes but refusing to fall. "I didn't do it to impress anyone." "I know," he replied. "That's what made it so powerful." His words were steady, anchoring me in this moment of reclaiming. Elaine tried one last time to salvage her image. During dessert, she approached our table with 2 glasses of champagne. "Truce?" she asked sweetly, as if this were a petty argument instead of a decade of calculated cruelty. Nathan looked at her with polite detachment, waiting for me to answer. I took the champagne and set it on the table untouched. "You don't get to offer peace after war," I said calmly. "You declared this long before tonight." Her eyes darted to Nathan, seeking an ally in civility, but he simply raised an eyebrow and said nothing. This was my moment to handle. "I'm not here to create a scene," Elaine insisted, lowering her voice. "Too late," I replied, just loud enough for the neighboring table to hear. "You created the scene. I just stopped pretending not to notice." That was the difference. I hadn't changed. I'd simply stopped letting their version of me go unchallenged. Elaine's smile faltered. "Harper, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut in. "You lost control. That's what scares you." She straightened her posture, years of social training rushing back into place. But it didn't matter anymore. The room had already seen through her mask. The cracks were now visible. As she walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. The weight I'd carried for so long, trying to be seen, had dissolved. I no longer needed to fit into their story. I was writing my own, and this time, they weren't the main characters anymore. The rest of the evening passed with a strange sort of peace. It was as if the storm had cleared, leaving behind air that was lighter, easier to breathe. The music resumed, soft and elegant. Conversations turned toward art, philanthropy, and things that had nothing to do with me, and I was okay with that. Nathan and I danced once, a slow waltz under the chandeliers. No cameras, no spectacle, just the two of us moving in sync. I rested my head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. That rhythm had guided me through the chaos. It was the sound of home, not the house I grew up in. As we left the ballroom later that night, people stopped to say goodbye. Some were genuine, others clearly opportunistic. I met each with the same grace, measured, respectful, distant. I wasn't angry anymore. I had no need to prove anything. Their approval didn't thrill me. Their disapproval didn't wound me. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet. Nathan opened the car door for me, and I paused to look back at the Grand Hotel. A building that had once symbolized exclusion now held the memory of my return. Not to beg, but to stand. Not as their forgotten stepdaughter, but as a woman fully formed. As we drove away, Nathan reached for my hand. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. I took a moment before answering. "Free," I whispered. It wasn't just the truth. It was a declaration, and for the first time in my life, it felt like I could finally begin. The morning after the gala, our phones didn't stop buzzing. Articles, social media posts, and society columns exploded with the news. Nathan Reed defends wife at gala meltdown. Headlines varied in tone, but the core was the same. I wasn't invisible anymore, and neither were their actions. Elaine and Madison had underestimated one thing: what public accountability looked like in the digital age. Videos of Madison filming me had circulated widely. Several commentators noted the disturbing glee in her eyes. Elaine's monologue was dissected online. Her fake smile turned meme-worthy. And Nathan's defense? It became a viral quote. They issued no statements, no apologies, just silence, which in their world, so built on optics, was deafening. Word spread that board members were reconsidering their positions. Donors began quietly pulling back. People who once lined up to sip champagne at their events were now distancing themselves, afraid of association. I watched it unfold with a strange sense of detachment, not satisfaction, just confirmation, that the mask had finally slipped, that the world was seeing what I'd lived through for years. But instead of feeling vindictive, I felt still, a calm acceptance that the storm had passed, and I had survived. Nathan didn't bring it up unless I did. He made space for me to process. We sat in our apartment, curled up with takeout and old movies, letting the noise fade. I didn't check my messages. I didn't owe anyone my time. The ones who hadn't stood up for me before didn't get a front row seat now. By the second day, the apologies began. Polite emails, lavish floral arrangements, voicemails laced with selective memory. Suddenly, I was so loved, so admired, such a strong woman. It was almost funny. Almost. Cousins who hadn't texted me in 5 years were now offering to catch up over lunch. Each message had the same rhythm: praise, deflection, and omission. No one wanted to admit they'd laughed, that they stood by in silence, that they enjoyed the moment. No. Now they were shocked and horrified at what happened. The revisionist history spread like spilled wine. Fast, messy, and hard to clean up. One relative, whom I barely remembered, wrote, "It's a shame you didn't feel you could turn to us," as if I hadn't been turned away at every door. Another said, "We always knew you were special." Yet I remembered the empty seats at my college graduation, the birthdays that passed unnoticed, the deliberate distance. I responded to none of them. I didn't delete the messages. I didn't need to erase the evidence. I simply chose silence. Not the silence of shame, the silence of boundaries. The silence of someone who no longer needs validation from those who only offer it when it's convenient for them. Nathan smiled when I told him. "It's amazing what people remember when a camera's on them," he said. And he was right. What they really wanted wasn't reconnection. It was redemption. Public redemption. I wouldn't be the vessel for their cleanup arc. I wasn't the cleanup crew. I was the one they discarded. While my birth family scrambled for damage control, something beautiful was unfolding elsewhere. Janet, my father's sister, reached out, not with an apology but with accountability. Her message was short, raw, and real. "I should have said something years ago. I see it now. Can we talk?" I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe near the gallery. She arrived alone, no rehearsed speech, no self-preserving deflection. Just honesty. She admitted what no one else would, that she saw what Elaine did and stayed silent. That fear kept her quiet. That silence made her complicit. "I told myself it wasn't my place," she said, tears welling in her eyes. But it was. It always was. Her regret wasn't performative. It wasn't about public image. It was about truth. And in that truth, I felt something unexpected. Connection. Not with the aunt I remembered, but with the woman sitting before me now. We talked for 2 hours. About my father. About the years lost. About grief and choices. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She asked for a chance to rebuild something new. That humility moved me. I said yes. Not to the past, but to a possible future. One built on transparency, not tradition. When I got home, Nathan asked how it went. I told him it felt like a door cracked open, not wide, not forced, just enough light to see the possibility of healing. "Sounds like family," he said, wrapping his arm around me. "Not the kind we inherit, the kind we create." Madison's social media, once a polished portfolio of privilege, began unraveling in real time. The video of her gleefully filming my humiliation was reposted by several popular influencers who called it out as classist cruelty. Comments flooded in. Her brand partnerships quietly vanished. Invitations stopped coming. At first, she tried denial, claimed the video was misunderstood, taken out of context. But context doesn't lie when your laughter is caught on camera. People saw what they saw. A woman delighting in someone else's pain. The kind of behavior society no longer tolerates under polite smiles and designer gowns. She posted a weak apology video in soft lighting, voice trembling. But it lacked substance. No mention of me by name, no ownership. Just vague sentiments about learning and growing. The comments were brutal. "You're sorry you got caught," one wrote. "Not sorry for what you did." Janet forwarded me the video with a simple message. "This feels hollow." I didn't reply. I didn't watch the full clip. I didn't need to. Madison had always craved attention. Now she had it. For all the wrong reasons. And for once, I wasn't the one forced to bear the consequences. That night, Nathan poured me a glass of wine. "Karma is fast these days," he joked gently. I smiled, but not in satisfaction. It wasn't joy I felt. It was release. For once, her actions had boomeranged back to her. And I didn't have to lift a single finger. The universe had handled it. After the gala, my inbox swelled with requests. From talk shows, podcasts, even a book agent. "The billionaire wife who stunned high society." One subject line read. They wanted the drama, the scandal. They wanted a story they could spin, monetize, digest. But I wasn't for sale. It would have been easy to ride the wave, to capitalize on the moment. But that wasn't the story I wanted to tell. I didn't want to become a symbol of revenge or spectacle. I wanted to reclaim my voice, not amplify their noise. So I said no to all of it. My silence confused them. "But think of the platform," one agent pressed. "You could help others." I already was, quietly, meaningfully, through our foundation, through the gallery. Not everything impactful needed to be broadcast. Sometimes the most powerful change happens away from the spotlight. Nathan supported me completely. "The story is yours," he said. "Tell it only if it feels healing, not performative." That distinction became my compass. I wasn't obligated to satisfy anyone's curiosity. I didn't owe the world access to my wounds just because they'd been made public. Instead of interviews, I invested that energy into the art therapy program. I worked with children processing grief, children who didn't need a headline, just a safe space to be seen. That was my platform. That was my impact. Quiet, steady, and deeply real. 6 months after the gala, the Thomas Matthews Art Therapy Foundation launched. Named in my father's honor, it was built not to redeem his name, but to redirect it toward healing. The idea had come quietly, over coffee with Nathan. "Let's take back what they tried to bury," he said. We secured a space, modest but warm, filled with natural light and blank canvases. Children from the hospital, from shelters, from foster homes, began coming weekly, some silent, some angry, all aching to be heard. Through color and clay, they began to speak in their own language. I worked directly with them, side by side. No titles, no press, just connection. Watching a child express their pain with a brushstroke instead of a breakdown, it healed something in me, too. Their bravery reminded me of my own. How I, too, had found my voice through creation. Janet joined the board, quietly offering support, no longer afraid of confrontation. Nathan handled logistics and fundraising, always careful not to overshadow the mission. It wasn't about him, or even me. It was about legacy, about using pain as fertilizer for purpose. On launch night, as I stood in the studio's doorway watching a room filled with laughter, glitter, and hope, I felt it, the shift, from surviving to serving, from hurting to helping. I hadn't just built a program. I'd built a home for stories that too often go unheard, including my own. For years, I lived in the shadow of needing them to see me, to validate my worth. Every accomplishment came with a silent wish. I hope they hear about this. It was a lingering echo of abandonment. But after the gala, something shifted permanently. I stopped looking over my shoulder. It wasn't bitterness. It was freedom. The realization that their recognition had no bearing on my joy, my peace, or my future. Elaine and Madison's absence was no longer a void. It was a door closed, sealed, locked from my side, and I had no desire to reopen it ever again. I began measuring success by how deeply I could connect, not impress. How many children left art therapy sessions smiling instead of crying? How many artists at the gallery felt empowered instead of dismissed? That became my currency. That became the legacy worth chasing. When friends asked about my revenge arc, I corrected them gently. This wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. It wasn't about payback. It was about rebirth. I wasn't interested in proving them wrong. I was focused on proving myself right. That was infinitely more satisfying. Nathan watched this evolution with quiet pride. "You're not reacting to them anymore," he said one night. "You're finally just being." And he was right. My life no longer hinged on their recognition. I'd become the woman I was meant to be, and they had nothing to do with it. I stopped using the word stepmother. Elaine wasn't my mother, not even in name. She was a chapter, a complication, a cautionary tale. Family, I realized, isn't just blood or paperwork. It's consistency. It's presence. It's how someone shows up when it's inconvenient. Janet showed up. Lily showed up. Lily, Nathan's parents, showed up. They didn't have to. They chose to. That choice meant everything. I began cultivating family not by genealogy, but by soul alignment. It was like planting seeds and watching something real bloom. Our gatherings looked different now. No elaborate tablescapes or guest lists curated for optics. Just home-cooked meals, mismatched plates, laughter that didn't need to be moderated. It was messy, imperfect, and absolutely sacred. These were the people I would call family. For the first time, holidays felt like healing instead of obligation. There were no veiled comments, no performance, just connection. I cried the first time Nathan's mom made my favorite childhood dish without even asking. She remembered. She saw me. That was love. The family I had lost, it never truly existed the way I imagined. But the one I had now, it was real. And it was enough. I didn't need to recreate the past. I had something better. A present built on mutual respect and an unshakable foundation of choice. Peace didn't arrive in a grand crescendo. It came quietly, like a soft evening breeze through an open window. One night, I noticed I hadn't thought of Elaine in weeks. Not with anger, not with sorrow, just not at all. And that silence was the loudest healing of all. I no longer rehearsed imaginary confrontations. No longer replayed moments, wishing I had said more or less. My mind had moved on, not because I suppressed it, but because I processed it fully. Finally, my peace wasn't passive. It was earned, carved through years of pain. I began sleeping more soundly, eating more slowly, smiling at nothing in particular. I had space again, internally. Space not occupied by resentment or regret. I filled it with art, with morning walks, with deep, unhurried conversations. Peace is a quiet revolution. Nathan noticed it too. "You're lighter," he said, brushing hair from my face. "Like you're finally breathing fully." I was, and I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding in until I finally let it all go. That's the thing about peace. You don't chase it. You clear space for it. And once it enters, you never want to let it go. Not for validation, not for vengeance, not for anyone. I had walked through fire and found cool waters on the other side. That stillness? That was the reward, and I planned to guard it fiercely for the rest of my life. Elaine and Madison never reached out again. No apology, no explanation, just silence. And strangely, that silence became the most truthful thing they ever gave me. It confirmed what I always feared, but now finally accepted. I was never really family to them, and now I didn't need to be. Their absence in my life wasn't a tragedy. It was a relief. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to change. I wasn't waiting, period. Their silence allowed me to move forward with clarity, with intention, with no strings still attached to pain. Whenever people asked if I missed them, I answered honestly, no. What I missed was the idea of them, the illusion of family. But illusions don't offer shelter during storms. They disappear when you need them most, and that's what they had always done. Disappear. My life felt cleaner without their noise. Simpler, not because it lacked challenge, but because it lacked manipulation. I had grown allergic to pretense. My circle now only included people who could love without condition. Elaine and Madison had failed that test long ago, and so I let silence stand. I didn't try to fill it with messages or olive branches. I let them choose distance. I honored that choice, because now my peace required boundaries, and silence from toxic people was the purest boundary I could ever receive. The Thomas Matthews Art Therapy Foundation became more than a project. It became my mission. Every child we served reminded me why I fought so hard to survive what I did. I couldn't erase my pain, but I could help others transform theirs. That was enough. That was everything. We hosted workshops, painted murals in hospitals, and offered scholarships for young artists dealing with grief. I watched as colors replaced words for kids who didn't know how to speak their sorrow. I saw healing take shape through brushstrokes. It was holy work. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was honoring my father in a way that mattered. Not through titles or inheritance, but through meaning, through impact, through love translated into action. And that made me feel closer to the version of him I still wanted to believe existed. Nathan supported every step of it. Not by leading, but by lifting. He never made it about his name or his influence. He made it about mission, about children, about the kind of legacy that wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed. He showed me how power could serve. Purpose became our compass. And every decision we made, whether professional or personal, had to align with it. I no longer needed revenge. I didn't crave vindication. My life had evolved past proving anything. I was finally living for something greater than my wounds. There was a time when I would have done anything to rewrite my childhood. I would have traded memories, rewritten chapters, deleted names. But now I understood the power of my past, not as something to idolize or regret, but as something that refined me. My pain wasn't my identity, but it had shaped my strength. It had taught me discernment, grit, compassion. Without it, I wouldn't have known what real love looks like. I wouldn't have known how to choose peace, or how to reject anything that looked like control. Looking back no longer hurt. It educated. It showed me the distance between then and now. It proved that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral that returned to old wounds just to show how much less they stung. And that realization gave me power. Sometimes I still passed familiar streets or buildings tied to old memories, but instead of flinching, I smiled. I made it out. I made it through, not in spite of what happened, but in defiance of it, and in honor of the version of me that refused to disappear quietly. I no longer needed answers from them. I had given myself closure, not by shutting doors, but by walking through better ones. The best revenge wasn't spectacle or wealth, it was peace, and I had it. Finally. Irrevocably. Fully. There was a certain poetic justice in knowing they couldn't reach me anymore. Not because I blocked their numbers or deleted their emails, but because I no longer needed anything they could offer. The version of me who once begged for acknowledgement had vanished. What remained was someone whole, someone unreachable by manipulation. Elaine and Madison had always relied on access to my vulnerability, access to my silence, access to the belief that I needed them more than they needed me. But once I withdrew that access, their power disintegrated. They didn't know how to navigate a version of me they couldn't control. They tried subtle ways to pull me back in. A forwarded email here, a tagged photo there, even a vague message from a mutual acquaintance. But I saw through it all. They were seeking proximity to my peace, not to offer reconciliation, but to reclaim relevance. And that I wouldn't allow. I wasn't cold. I wasn't bitter. I was simply unavailable to old games. I had learned that forgiveness didn't always require reconnection. Sometimes it required boundaries, and mine were made of steel now, not guilt, not obligation, just clarity. That was the cost of my healing, and I paid it gladly. It felt powerful to walk past doors I once begged to be let into, knowing now that they led nowhere I wanted to go. Letting them lose access wasn't punishment. It was protection, not just from them, but from any version of me that still sought their approval. That chapter had closed for good. For so long, I carried the ache of wondering if my father truly saw me, if he knew how deeply I'd been pushed aside. But through the foundation and Janet's stories, I began piecing together a quieter truth, one layered beneath the noise Elaine created. My father hadn't abandoned me. He'd simply been lost too. Janet's honesty opened wounds, but also healed them. I learned about the photos he kept hidden, the letters he never mailed, the moments when he spoke of me with pride, even if he didn't know how to fight for me. Maybe he wasn't the hero I wanted, but he had loved me in his limited way. So I stopped needing him to have been perfect. I stopped waiting for a version of him that never existed. Instead, I honored who he was and who he couldn't be. I let my grief breathe instead of suffocating it with expectations. And from that space, I built something beautiful. The foundation became a tribute not just to art, but to healing what was broken between us. Every child we helped, every painting hung on a therapy room wall, felt like a conversation restored, a whisper across time that said, "You mattered. You were never invisible." And that, in the end, was enough. In rewriting his legacy, I reclaimed mine too. No longer the girl cut out of the will, but the woman building something that would outlive any trust fund, something built on meaning, on resilience, on hope. And that redefinition made peace possible, even with the ghosts that used to haunt me. I used to think strength meant fighting back, proving them wrong, showing up louder, prouder, more successful. But in time, I learned that real strength sometimes whispers. It doesn't demand attention. It chooses stillness, grace, the power to disengage without apology. At the gala, I could have shouted. I could have listed every betrayal, exposed every lie, humiliated them in return. But I didn't need to, because I wasn't there to win a war. I was there to walk away from it. And that decision changed everything. It restored my dignity without destroying my peace. Stillness became my rebellion. While they clung to drama, I chose detachment. While they chased attention, I built a life in quiet fulfillment. And that difference in rhythm drove them mad. Because nothing frustrates a manipulator more than someone who no longer reacts. In stillness, I found space to think clearly, to decide what mattered and what didn't, to respond with purpose instead of pain. It wasn't passivity, it was mastery. A level of control that didn't require permission, approval, or spectacle. Just certainty. Just self-respect. The most powerful thing I ever did wasn't confront them, it was refuse to center them. I no longer needed them to understand my side of the story, because I knew it. I lived it. And I had already survived it. Stillness became my statement, and it said everything they needed to hear. Healing wasn't glamorous. It didn't happen in sweeping epiphanies or movie-worthy confrontations. It happened in the quiet mornings when I no longer woke up feeling like a burden. In the days I painted without tears, worked without bitterness, loved without fear of abandonment. That was progress. Some days healing meant crying in the shower. Other days it meant deleting a message instead of replying. It meant therapy, deep breathing, journaling things I wasn't ready to say out loud. It meant forgiving myself for what I tolerated and letting go of the need to make them apologize. The past didn't vanish, but its grip loosened. I could look at old pictures and feel compassion instead of rage. I could remember my father's voice without feeling hollow. I didn't rewrite history. I just stopped letting it dictate my present. That was freedom. That was healing. Healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about integrating, letting the scars stay visible as proof that I survived. I didn't need to pretend it hadn't hurt. I just needed to stop letting it hurt now. And that shift, subtle, steady, was the most sacred transformation of all. In the mirror, I started to see someone I was proud of. Someone strong, not in spite of her pain, but because of it. I didn't heal to impress anyone. I healed to live, fully, authentically, without needing the approval of people who were never qualified to define me in the first place. There's a silence that feels empty, and a silence that feels full. I learned to embrace the second kind. After the gala, when texts and emails poured in from relatives I hadn't heard from in years, I didn't reply, not out of malice, but because I didn't owe anyone a performance. Letting them sit in discomfort was my justice. They could stew in their confusion, wonder what Nathan thought, worry about their reputation. I had no interest in explaining my life to people who once questioned my right to belong. Their curiosity wasn't my responsibility to satisfy. Silence became a boundary they couldn't breach. It said, "You no longer get to narrate my story." They tried to bait me back in with flattery and nostalgia, hoping to regain access. But access is earned, not inherited, and they forfeited that right long ago. Not every injustice requires a dramatic response. Sometimes the loudest answer is no answer at all. I let my life speak for itself. My peace, my marriage, my purpose. These things couldn't be faked or fabricated. They were real, and their existence was louder than any apology never offered. So I said nothing, and in that silence, I found strength they could never touch. I became untouchable not by lashing out, but by living well, in quiet defiance, in unapologetic joy, in the peace that comes when you stop explaining and start existing. Legacy used to mean wealth, buildings, plaques with names etched in gold. But now, it meant something else to me. It meant leaving behind a path others could follow, especially those who had been discarded like I once was. I didn't want a monument. I wanted movement. The Thomas Matthews Art Therapy Foundation wasn't just my tribute to my father. It was my rebellion against the narrative that said I was unworthy. Every child we helped, every program we funded, every smile restored, it all rewrote that story. With every brushstroke, I reclaimed my voice. We held workshops for grieving children, exhibits for underrepresented artists, outreach in schools where trauma had silenced creativity. Our mission wasn't just art, it was restoration, of voice, of identity, of hope. And in that mission, I found something I'd never expected: purpose beyond pain. Legacy, I realized, isn't measured in assets. It's measured in impact. And mine would be felt not in stock portfolios or society galas, but in laughter returning to quiet hallways, in children learning that what hurt them didn't have to define them. That, to me, was everything. In building that legacy, I finally outgrew the one that rejected me. I didn't need their name to build something lasting. I used my own, and with it, I built a future where worth wasn't conditional. A future I could look at proudly and say, This is mine. I used to think victory looked like revenge, like proving everyone wrong in one cinematic moment. But the real victory? It was subtler, softer. It was walking into rooms I once feared, without flinching. It was choosing joy after trauma, choosing love after rejection, choosing me. It was being married to someone who loved me for who I was, not who I could become. It was building a life I didn't have to explain or justify. It was laughter at the breakfast table, quiet nights at home, gallery openings filled with meaning, not status. That was triumph. Victory was peace that didn't demand performance, confidence that didn't beg for applause. It was looking in the mirror and seeing someone I respected, someone whole, someone who no longer needed closure from broken people. Because I had closed the door myself, they still talked, I'm sure, still speculated, still wondered how I managed to rise when they worked so hard to keep me small. But I didn't need to answer them. My life was the answer. My joy was the proof. And the silence that followed their gossip was the sound of their defeat. In the end, victory wasn't about them at all. It was about me reclaiming my power, my voice, my story. It was about living without apology. And as I stood at the edge of that old world, looking back one last time, I smiled. Because I didn't just survive them, I surpassed them. If this story found you in a season of doubt, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. You are not the labels they gave you. You are not the black sheep, not the outsider, not the invisible one. You are the author of your own redemption story, and your worth has never depended on their permission to rise. I know what it feels like to walk into a room full of people who claim to love you, but treat you like you're disposable. I know the ache of waiting for recognition that never comes, but I also know this. There comes a moment when you no longer need it, when your silence becomes your strength, when your life, exactly as it is, becomes the proof that you were always enough. You don't have to crash their events to belong. You don't have to beg for seats at their tables. Build your own table. Set it with purpose. Fill it with people who see you, not just when you're shining, but when you're still healing. And when they finally look your way again, let it be because your light became too bright to ignore. If you've ever been called crazy, dramatic, too much, or not enough, this story is for you. You are not too emotional. You are deeply aware. You are not too intense. You are fiercely alive. And you are not too broken. You are beautifully rebuilding. Brick by brick, breath by breath, you are becoming. If this story moved something in you, don't let it fade into the scroll. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story, your survival, your silent battles. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories that remind you of your power. Because sometimes the greatest form of healing is hearing, "Me too. I lived that, and I made it through." You don't need their applause to matter. You already do. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.